and thank you for joining us on Worldview tonight as we speak about the Oscar Pistorius sentencing. Now, a South African court on Tuesday sentenced Olympic track star Oscar Pistorius to 5 years in prison for the killing of his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp last year. As Judge Thokozile Masipa read out her verdict relating to charges of culpable homicide and handling a firearm illegally in a public restaurant, the 27-year-old, whose downfall has been likened to that of American football star O.J. Simpson, sued resolutely in the dock. Now, the former Olympian showed a rare lack of emotion as his fate was being decided by the trial judge. Most South Africans have argued that Oscar's case is worse than O.J. Simpson's case, and he should have received a longer prison sentence or a harsher sentence. Some people on the streets of South Africa are unhappy that Oscar Pistorius, who they feel shot Reeva in cold blood, will end up serving less than a year. They have labelled the verdict a complete miscarriage of justice. It is obvious that Oscar Pistorius may be free within months after being sentenced to 5 years in jail. Judge Masipa ruled out dolus eventualis, but what does dolus eventualis mean? Premeditated murder is simple enough. It was the prosecution's case that the Olympic and Paralympic athlete grabbed his gun and intentionally shot his girlfriend through the toilet door following a heated argument. In South Africa, all murder is murder. If intent is found in any of the 3 forms of dolus directus, dolus indirectus, or dolus eventualis, it is still murder under common law. In essence, it means that you are responsible for the foreseeable consequences of your actions should you foresee them. Right now, let's take a look at what South Africans had to say about the sentencing on the streets.
We call for the national prosecution for an appeal. We did that before, and we are doing it even today.
Oscar Pistorius still have to tell us the truth, what happened that fatal night, because he alone knows what happened that night. He killed an innocent, harmless and defenseless woman, and he must pay the price for that. What the intention to kill? Then we are told that it is a mistake. His nickname as from today will be Oscar Gunman Pistorius. You know, he cries like a baby, he screams like a woman, but he shoots like a soldier. Bah, 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 4 times. That is with the intention to kill.
By discharging 4 shots into the door.
We are disappointed because we are asking ourselves what kind of a message the judge and the justice of South Africa is sending to the entire community and the world, because it was wrong to murder somebody and go out with just a lousy sentence.
I think 5 years is really something that society was not expecting today. Society has been failed by Judge Masipa today. Oscar Pistorius committed a very serious crime and he should have gotten the right punishment.
That's a very good question. I'm listening to the people who are telling us what they feel about the verdict, about the sentencing, their beliefs and their thoughts, that perhaps it's not fair as far as they are concerned.
2, on count 2, the contravention of section 120, subsection 3B of the Firearms Control Act.
I think the public, with the televising of this particular trial, which is the first time in the history of South Africa, everybody's now suddenly become a lawyer. You know, all our viewers, all the listeners, everybody's got access to media. And, you know, it's culpable homicide, it's not murder. If it was murder and this type of sentence was imposed, then I think the public would be correct to have a public outcry.
Well, there you've heard it. That was the people on the streets not happy with the sentencing of Judge Masipa. Now, joining me in studio this evening is Laurie Peter James, a criminologist and a forensic profiler, and Mr. Emmanuel Mavaranyika, Head of Department of the Criminology and Criminal Justice at Monash, South Africa. Good evening and thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Good evening, Yvonne.
Okay, now we're talking about the story. Everybody has been talking about it, not only in South Africa alone, but obviously the world over. Now, the Constitution of South Africa allows a judicial legal system which uses a trial judge as opposed to a jury system, which was abolished in 1969 because white jurors were accused of being impartial and being racist when, during trials. So how workable has the trial judge system been in relation to what we see in the current courts today?
Well, I think, firstly, the jury system was abolished in 1969, actually, here in South Africa. And in fact, by the time it was abolished in 1969, by the Abolition of Juries Act of 1969, jury systems were hardly being used at that time. So at the time of abolition, it was merely a formality. It was abolished for some of the reasons that you mentioned, that white juries in particular were not being impartial throughout a number of trials, especially politically motivated trials. We should also bear in mind that the jury system in South Africa started before apartheid, and it was simply adopted by the apartheid regime, but eventually it wasn't necessarily serving its purpose. Some of the juries were seen as being too lenient towards some of the defendants, especially the political defendants of the era, and it became very convenient for them to abolish it, as well as because of the segregation within the criminal justice system. It was not deemed suitable during the apartheid era, especially in the 60s, to have Africans sitting on juries as well, and they chose not to have a representative jury, and just decided ultimately to just abandon the jury system outright. So this is why today we don't have the jury system, and we have rather a presiding officer, and depending on the nature of the case, with assessors at times. We have sort of replaced that jury.
Okay. Yes. Now, Laurie, I just want to ask you something with regards to this question. He did mention that it was abolished in 1969, and then to date, I'm asking, what is it that we can see that is different now? It seems like the story of racism has always been there. Is it still visible? In as much as we still have the judge presiding instead of a jury, of course. Is it still actually visible? Can we still say there's still a clear cut between black and white in South African justice system today?
No, and I think that's very important. Our jurors that are on the bench today are trained in law, and that's also a baseline difference between a jury system. Jurors tend to judge a case on emotion, whereas in the South African system, the judges today judge purely on the law and applying the legal facts. So they're all legally trained, and there's no emotion involved in our jurors.
Okay, so we can dismiss that fact. Now, there has been an argument that the judgment in Oscar Pistorius' case does not acknowledge the presence or the possibility of injuring or killing the intruder. Would that have made a difference if it had been acknowledged? And why did the judge actually ignore that part?
Okay, what we saw in the verdict was that the judge ruled out dolus eventualis, which is the simplest form of intent. What she said is Oscar did not foresee the possibility of killing another person. Had he foreseen it and gone ahead with his actions, he would have been convicted of murder and not culpable homicide. She convicted him of culpable homicide, which is purely negligent. There's no intent. So it's not seen then by the courts as a violent crime. It's a crime involving negligence. And that is the fundamental difference.
Okay, your comment, please.
Yes, I think I agree with Laurie in that regard, that certainly in terms of culpable homicide, well, firstly, to a great extent, as with many other legal minds on this, I do believe that she did make an error in law in terms of convicting him of culpable homicide and not murder dolus eventualis. But yes, that's the judgment we have. That's the judgment that we have to live with for now, until and when it is appealed. And yeah, we'll just have to wait and see if that will happen within the next 2 weeks or so. Okay,
could you please just explain the error in law that you just mentioned? Because I do know that a lot of people have been so unhappy, and they do say that the judge was just not really, didn't give it the best, you know. They think more could have been done. What error in law are you specifically talking about?
Okay, certainly from a, with murder, it's premeditated. Okay, which is dolus directus, i.e. he had the intention and he had planned it and so on and so forth. That was not proven by the facts, okay? And I think most people were happy with that. Whereas with Dolus Eventualis, probably it's the way she worded her judgment and said, did Oscar foresee killing Riva, right? And that is not the question to be asking when you're dealing with Dolus Eventualis. The question to be asking is, did Oscar foresee killing the person standing behind the door?
Instead of mentioning the actual name.
The actual person. It does not matter whether it was Riva or an intruder or a child or whoever was behind that door. So Dolus Eventualis asked, did he foresee killing the person behind the door? Yeah.
Sorry, just to interject, during the judgment she did correct that. On the first day she said killing Riva, on the second day she said killing the person behind the door. But what was very interesting was in the sentence where she actually almost contradicted the judgment, where Judge Masipa actually pointed out that that Oscar acted with the intent to kill the person behind the door, and that is how she worded it in the sentence, which contradicted the judgment, because had there been an intent to kill the person behind the door, he should have been convicted of murder. So this is what's causing the raging debate in the legal circles as well.
Absolutely. Now, why are certain offenders more equal than others before the law?
Yvonne, I think that's a matter of opinion. Our prison system is very flawed. Our legal system is very flawed. There are many, many challenges. We have challenges from the police services right through to the high courts. So I think to generalize would be very unfair. I think it's very specific case to case and around the circumstances of each case. And it's a lot is to do with perception and not fact, because when we're dealing with criminal events, unfortunately, we're dealing with emotion.
Okay, but will we dismiss the fact that it has nothing to do with the influence of the money that the person has? Because this has been a very big question. Is it because the influence that I have financially would actually change the course of my judgment? Is that a factor?
Anybody with financial resources can hire the best attorneys, and that's what changes this. It's not race-based or anything else. It's finance-based. And unfortunately, you can buy the justice that you can afford to buy, and that is a challenge.
Okay. Would you like to add on to that?
Yes, I believe justice, I'll term justice as a social service, really. The access to justice itself is very difficult for many people, as with other social services, as with other socio-economic services. How you access health, what level of health you receive in South Africa depends on your pocket. How you access education, the level and degrees of education, how far you go with your education, again, depends on your pocket. And justice is exactly the same thing. How many people can afford to hire the likes of Barry Roo and so on and so forth? It's not the ordinary South African who can afford that. So to answer your question, in essence, these are just social dynamics playing themselves out now, particularly in the courtroom. Even people who are arrested. You have people who've been on remand for 2 years, 3 years, awaiting trial. Oscar's case has come and gone. Right. In terms of, we've got the judgment, we've got the sentence. If the appeal comes, it'll come the next 2 weeks, and so on and so forth. But it's not everyone who has the resources to have such a speedy trial, and the nature of the trial as well. We had cameras all around, the international media all around. Not every trial gets that. And right now, I think the next big trial is the Dawani. Again, he's got a lot of resources, and he's trying to defend himself. But just coming back to my main point, it all boils down to these social inequalities, which manifest themselves health, education, and justice as well.
And another thing, the South African legal system found itself on trial very publicly. We had all the international media. We had a huge spotlight. Devani isn't even touching in the social media or in the media on anything else. It's nowhere near Oscar. This was huge, and South Africa was defending its own justice system in a manner of speaking. So every resource that was available was ploughed into this trial from the state's point of view.
Now, if the state decides to appeal, how does the appeal process run? And can that change the culpable homicide? Can it be overturned?
Yes.
The charge of culpable homicide, can it be overturned?
It can be reversed by the appeal court. What I suspect will happen is if the state appeals, if I were Garinal, I would ask for the case to be heard by a full bench at the Supreme Court of Appeal. That he must file within the next 14 days. For this, then each party would file their arguments, and that would be reviewed by the Supreme Court of Appeal, preferably a panel of 5 Supreme Court of Appeal judges, who would then consider all the evidence and all the facts of law placed before them. Of course, the state can only appeal on matters of law. They cannot appeal on matters of fact, like the defence could have had they wanted to. And then it will be reviewed and a verdict will be handed down. Of course, a majority of 3 if it's a panel of 5. And anybody that dissents must put the reason for their dissenting judgment down as well. And this is what we need. We need clarification on the judgment, because the lower courts are bound by the decisions of the higher courts. And at the moment we have mass confusion even among university law professors battling to understand this judgment. So can you imagine a junior magistrate trying to apply this judgment in a magistrate's court? It's going to be an absolute nightmare going forward. So we need this appeal and we need the clarity.
Okay. Now, do you think that with the way the trial has turned out, and then we've got Reeves' family, we've got the Pistorius family, all seeking closure, and we have this sentencing and this judgment that he has been given by Judge Masipa. What does this mean for Oscar as an athlete, and what does this mean for Oscar as a person in the society, and for both families as well?
Well, I think primarily for Oscar, as things stand at the present time, he will have to serve 10 months in prison before his sentence can be considered for conversion to correctional supervision. And that will depend on his behaviour in court, his participation in the rehabilitation process. He will be assessed, and then correctional services will determine him a suitable candidate, and he will be released. Of course, it's going to be very interesting because they're looking at his uncle Arnold's house as the home in which he will serve his correctional supervision. But Uncle Arnold is a gun collector. So how sensible would it be to release him into a home that's filled with guns? Is a question I find myself asking, which hasn't even been raised yet, of course, as we're not at that point yet.
But then the court was considering taking him to that house.
Absolutely.
Okay, but what do you think will happen to Oscar, though, as an athlete? Does he still have a future in the athlete fame and industry? Is he still going to go somewhere, or this is it? This is the end of Oscar Pistorius?
Well, if news reports are anything to go by, certainly before the sentence was read, you had a number of athletic associations saying, yes, if he does go in and he serves his time, he's more than welcome to come back and continue his trade as an athlete. But of course, if he serves his 1/6, that is his 10 months, we must also bear in mind that just because he'll be out of prison does not essentially mean that he's no longer under correctional control, under correctional supervision. There'll be very stringent measures, very stringent conditions which are set on him, i.e. he can be told where to go, where he can't go, right, in terms of geographical areas. If he needs to leave the country, perhaps he'll need to seek permission from the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, and maybe report to the SAPS. Cannot go to certain places of entertainment, cannot drink, cannot be involved in certain activities, and of course the other conditions that were placed on him in terms of his sentence, that he's not found guilty, again, of any similar offences of the crimes that he was convicted and sentenced for. So even if he is released after he served a 1/6 of his sentence, for the next odd 4 years or so, while he's under correctional supervision, his life will not be the same in that regard. And we must bear in mind, certainly the Steenkamp family have gone through a lot here, and one hopes that they have found closure throughout this particular process. But also spare a thought for the Pistorius family as well, who in a sense had nothing to do with the crime that was committed, but they are very much affected by this, and there seems to be very little public sympathy for the Pistorius family, understandably, for various reasons. But certainly the next 5 years of his life will not be the same for him, whether he goes back to run or not. His life shall be essentially under the microscope. You saw what happened with Shabir Sheikh when he was released under medical parole, under the old medical parole regime. The media followed him wherever he went, hence revealed that he was now playing golf, now he's shopping, and etc., etc. It's not going to be a very good life for him as people
not pleasant
imagine.
At all.
Not
yes.
at all.
And yesterday the IOC actually made a statement that Oscar will not be allowed to participate in the 2016 games, so that's out. Another thing to consider is what brand, given the trial and the publicity around it, would be prepared to even associate with him. So I think sponsorship will be a huge challenge going forward, because no brand can afford to link their brand to Oscar Pistorius right now.
This just reminds me, earlier when we were sitting waiting for the program, we learned that the university that gave him an honorary degree has withdrawn that. They've taken that away from him.
No, they've been asked to consider withdrawing the honorary doctorate. Yes, it was in the UK papers today.
Who asked them to consider that?
I don't know. I didn't read the article. I just saw the headlines. It was tweeted to me just before we came on air.
Okay, all right. Now, the money issue. During the trial, we learned that the Steenkamp family had been receiving some sort of a payment from the Pistorius monthly, 6,000, and there was a possibility that Judge Masipa was going to actually rule and say that they should get some sort of a lump sum. Do you think that would have done justice, and why was that not considered in this particular sentencing, in the final sentencing?
I don't think that it was an order that Judge Masipa was going to make. He had what it showed was that he was prepared to make restitution, in that he did help the family with the 6,000 rand per month. So that shows a measure of taking responsibility for your actions and being prepared to make amends. But the Steenkamp family was offered a lump sum of 375,000 rand when he sold his last vehicle. They turned that down. But bear in mind, the Steenkamp family, although they have suffered a terrible loss in losing their daughter, they have signed lucrative contracts with the international media. And financially, I think with the book that June Steenkamp has released and these lucrative contracts, they will be in a position to repay the 6,000 rand a month, and they've indicated they're not looking for a lump sum. She referred to it as blood money, which was fairly interesting at the High Court.
Okay. Now, was it of any significance that Oscar was not in cuffs after the sentencing? And yet sometimes we find some of these people that are not even considered flight risks coming in shackles even, and even the handcuffs as well.
Okay, I'd like to take that one.
Okay, let's hear from both of you. Let's hear it from both of you.
The officer that actually arrested Mr. Steenkamp is a friend of mine, and I did discuss that with him afterwards. So that's why I said, let me take that
as well.
He said that given Oscar's emotional state and the fact that he was shaking and he was really emotionally pretty tense, he was worried that he would fall going down the steps, and given his disability, they did not want to risk him falling and not being able to put out a hand to save himself. He was calm, he was not crying, but the police officers were concerned for his safety, and that was the only reason they did not cuff him, and they didn't feel it was necessary to humiliate him any further, which shows compassion in our justice system.
Okay, you do agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that in the sense that certainly that would have been almost a final nail in the coffin of his humiliation and public embarrassment. Having been found guilty, having been sentenced to such a lengthy prison sentence, 5 years is lengthy, granted he may serve only 10 months, but certainly looking at the flight risk aspect, he wasn't going to go anywhere. All right, I think that from a safety perspective, he was no danger to the public or to anyone, to the officers or to any members of the public. So I think those were factors that were taken into consideration, and that he had accepted his fate. And as he went down those stairs to the cells there.
Okay, now you did mention that Oscar was, in fact, when people were watching on the day of the sentencing, he showed no remorse. He had no emotion on his face. He was just standing there waiting for Judge Masipa to hand down the sentencing. And yet, for most of the trial, from last year to until the last date, we saw a very emotional Oscar and not moved on the very day. What could have been the reason for that? What would be your comment for that?
Well, I think we mustn't judge him too harshly.
After having cried like a woman,
absolutely,
screaming like a woman.
I suspect he was well briefed. I suspect they expected the outcome. I also suspect he was medicated. or fairly strongly medicated.
Was it not because he knew that perhaps
And
maybe he had an idea of his sentencing already, and he knew very well that he's not going to be in prison for long, just 10 months maybe?
I seriously doubt that he would have been briefed on the actual sentence.
Okay.
What I do think is that they had an inkling that it would be incarcerative. So, you know, the flip side, and of course, if we'd like to be cynical, we can say there was no longer any need for tears. Judgment had now been handed down. There was nothing to gain by crying or vomiting. So perhaps he just tried to you know, take it like a man, shall we say, and accept his fate.
Okay, let's hear your comment.
Yeah, I think the opportunity and time and stage for tears had come and gone, and this was now simply an acceptance of what was coming to him. I sincerely also believe that he had been briefed, not so much on what the sentence would be, but in terms of a possibility that you need to brace yourself. There's a strong chance that you will be sent to prison, you will be incarcerated. And so it probably did not come so much as a surprise for him. And there's the theory that he may have taken certain medication to calm him and not overreact or be too over-emotional once, if a custodial sentence was passed on to him. And yeah, so there are a variety of reasons, but I sincerely believe he had been briefed and he had accepted. And certainly just listening to the Judge Masipa, as she was about to hand down his sentence, he knew that he was going in. It was just an issue of for how long. And that was, I think, he probably did the maths. Okay, 5 years, 60 months. A sixth of that is 10 months. But yeah, it's not too bad. And I think deep down he also felt, just from based on what she said, this is something I do deserve, and there's no need for me to be melodramatic here. Let me take it like a man. And yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And just accept what it is.
Just accept it is, yeah.
Okay, right now we're going to go on a short break, but then when we come back, we want to talk about the interesting part of him being in a special cell. And there has been a lot of, you know, questions surrounding that. If he is a criminal and he's been incarcerated for committing a crime, why does he have to be in a special cell? We have seen other people that are also on wheelchairs, but they're in the riffraff of everybody else. So what is really so special about certain people having been put in a different section altogether? But all that coming after this short break. Right now we'll take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us on Worldview. Now we're going to have to round up this as quickly as we possibly can because we're out of time. Why would he be put in a different cell, in a special cell? And then we also learned that he will be sharing that special cell with Radovan Krejcir.
Okay, firstly, that was a rumour. The Department of Correctional Services came out strongly at court in denial of that as a rumour. I think what we have to understand is that Oscar Pistorius is vulnerable. He is a double amputee. He is very well known. He would be possibly be in danger inside of the prisons, both from extortion and many other reasons. So I think in the interest of his safety, and, you know, corrections do not want an incident involving Oscar Pistorius because it will again be world news headlines. And they have to protect their own reputation. They've stood up in court. They've made, they made assertions that correctional services is equipped to handle him. Now they have to handle him and keep him safe.
Okay, now I have to cut you short. Your last comment, please.
Yes, last comment. Just bear in mind that during the pre-sentencing stage, allegations were made that it is by the defense that the correctional services are incompetent, they have inadequate facilities to look after people like Oscar, and certainly pressure was now put on them to ensure that firstly he's put in a place that is safe and secure, and that enhances his rehabilitation and so on and so forth. So it's not necessarily a privilege that he's getting, because I'm sure there are other prisoners in that particular section of the prison.
Okay,
You know.
I have to cut you short. Unfortunately, we have run out of time and we have come to the end of our program. Viewers, join us again next week on Thursday on Worldview as we bring you some more current heating stories. It's goodbye for now.